What's going on, YouTube? It's Craig, certified technician here at ApplianceVideo.com, and today we have this Whirlpool top-load washing machine, and I will show you, the consumer, how to go through all the different portions of diagnostics that this unit has. So before we get too far, make sure you like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's jump right in. To enter diagnostics, what you'll want to do is make sure your machine has been plugged in for about 2 minutes and make sure the display is off. And then I want you to pick a sequence of buttons, because what you'll do is go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And it doesn't matter which buttons you press, just as long as it's not the power button. And if you've successfully entered diagnostics, the display will enter a service technician mode and illuminate so that you can navigate through the diagnostic modes. Now that we are in diagnostics, you'll notice that the display shows different ways to navigate, so I'm going to break it down for you. The buttons are labeled with the top left button being exit, the bottom left button being left, the top right button being enter, and the bottom right button being right. So to enter diagnostics, once we've gotten to this portion, you'll want to press the top right button in order to enter. And then it's going to give you different operations that we can go through. To navigate through the functions, you'll either press the bottom right key or the bottom left key for right or left. And the service mode functions are as follows. There is a factory diagnostics column, a system information column, a fault history column, and a service diagnostics column. So what I want you to do here is navigate to where we have factory diagnostics and then press the top right enter key in order to enter this section. And this is broken down to a couple of different options. We have factory cycle, DLMS calibration cycle, factory calibration cycle, and factory reset. The options that say factory on it are just for the factory. The only option I want you to select here is the DLMS calibration cycle. Now, this calibration cycle is just kind of a consumer calibration cycle, and it's highly advised anytime you replace any part on the machine. So once you enter it, you press the normal button, and it'll automatically go through that cycle and tell you when it's done. Once it's done, it only takes about 3 to 5 minutes, you can press the top left key in order to exit this section and move on. Back at the main screen, I want you to hit right until we get to the system information and press enter. In this portion, we have the model number, the serial number, the connectivity status, the system version, as well as the HMI version. This is a great portion of diagnostics. Why is it great? Because a lot of times I go out to consumers' houses and I realize that the model number sticker has gotten ripped off and there's no way for me to find the model and serial number. This is great because you can enter it, get any type of model and serial number you need from the unit, and order your parts accordingly. After we are done with this section, go ahead and hit the top left button to exit, and then we're going to scroll to the fault history portion. And this option consists of fault history, fault code display, as well as clear fault history. As you can see on our screen, currently this machine does not have a fault code. But if you have entered this portion, it does have a fault code. Right here is where it would read. Now this machine has approximately 30 to 34 different fault codes that can pop up, but I'm going to go through the most common ones you might find as a consumer. One of the more common error codes I find is an FOE2 for an oversuds error. Did you know that these machines do not take much soap? What I find is that consumers will fill that cup full of detergent, pour it in, and think it's good to go, and a lot of times they'll throw this error code. What I would do is lower your soap by about half the amount, try it out, and I'm probably about 99% sure that it's going to work. You may find an overload error code, which is an FOE3, indicating that maybe you have too much clothing inside the unit. Also, a very common error code for consumers, because what happens is clothing will get stuck on one side of the drum, and with the hanging suspension, it's very easy for this thing to knock around. If you hear it knocking around, go downstairs, press pause, rearrange your clothing, and start it back up before it throws this error code. There are a few electronic control faults that can happen in this unit, such as an F1E1 for a main control ACU fault, F2E1 for an HMI stuck button, F2E2 for an HMI disconnected, F6E1 for communication error, and another communication error with the F6E3. Once again, these are usually electronic control problems, and that could range anywhere from your UI to your actual main control board. If you do have one of these error codes, I would highly advise to call a professional to check it out. There are a couple of different error codes that can pop up for different inlet and pressure problems, such as an F3E2 for a pressure system fault, an F3E3 for an inlet water temperature fault, an F8E1 for a long fill, an F8E3 for an overflood condition, and then an F8E6 for a water hazard. If you have one of these error codes, you're going to want to start with your incoming water. So you have a couple of different options here. First of all, if you have a no-fill error code, what I would do is take the lines off the back of the machine and ensure you have good water pressure. A lot of times what I'll find is that the cold water pressure is not very good, and since it only rinses in cold, it'll never finish the cycle. Another thing that you might find is that the inlet valve is stuck open. If it has one of these flood conditions or an overflow or anything like that, you want to make sure that the machine is not filling as it is actually off. If it is filling while it's off, that means that the actual inlet valve is filled with calcium, causing that door to not close properly and will need to be replaced. Moving forward, we have a couple of different error codes which indicate a problem with the lid lock system. And these would be F5E1 for a lid switch fault indicating the lid is open, and F5E3, which would either mean lid lock will not unlock or lid lock will not lock. And then, of course, you may find an F5E4 for a lid not open between cycles. Lid lock mechanisms are a very common part to be replaced in the field right now, but there's two different parts that you want to look at. Of course, you got your lid lock. You can look inside, make sure nothing's obstructing it, make sure there's no soap in there that's gumming it up, and if it is, maybe clean it out with a Q-tip. But then, of course, you have the strike itself. This little tooth has to go down inside the lid lock mechanism, telling it that it is closed and allowing it to lock. If this tooth portion is bad, that means that that needs to be replaced. If the tooth portion is good and it's giving lid lock issues or error codes, make sure you go to replacing the lid lock. The next set of error codes indicate an issue with the wash system, which could either be your shifter or your motor. We have an MCI drive error, which is an F7E2, an F7E3, which is basket engaged during wash, F7E4, basket re-engagement failure, F7E6, motor circuit open, F7E7, motor unable to reach targeted RPM, F7E8, motor drive module over temp, F7E9 for a locked rotor, and finally F7E8 for motor phase loss. The next few error codes would indicate a problem with the drive system, which could either be the motor or the shifter. If you have one of these error codes, the first thing I would do is make sure your basket spins freely. Make sure nothing is stuck in there causing it to not spin correctly. And then, of course, tip up the machine and do a good visual inspection. Look around your motor, make sure a sock hasn't gotten stuck up in there, and see if there's any visible damage. If you do not see any visible damage that you can fix as a consumer, I would highly recommend with any of these error codes to call a trained professional. And this will bring us to my least favorite error code, which is an F9E1 for a long drain. If you have this error code, get all the water out of your machine and try to put down some towels. Tip that unit back and take apart your drain pump and look to see if you find some type of sock in there. If you don't find anything obstructing that drain, the chances are your drain pump needs to be replaced. Now, of course, after you are done with all of your error codes and replaced any components that you need to replace, you need to clear that fault history. So go into the portion where it says clear fault history and hit enter to clear it out. And then we'll go ahead and back out to the main diagnostic menu. Moving forward, our next option is Service Diagnostics. So we'll go ahead and hit that bottom right key until it shows Service Diagnostics on the display and hit enter. The different options in this subcategory would be HMI test, component activation, sensor feedback, diagnostic cycle. So let's go ahead and hit the HMI test and press enter. And during this portion, there's a couple of different things that you can test in this category, such as key test, LED test, display test, audio test, and encoder test. This HMI test category is great if you think that some of the UI functions are not working properly on the machine. So what we'll do is let's go through the key test. Go to the key test portion and hit enter. And then during this portion, you can select different keys and the display will show you if it's working or not. So I like to go through every single portion, press it maybe once, maybe twice to make sure everything's working properly. And then once you're done, you'll hit the back key for about 3 to 5 seconds to exit this portion. Going back to the Service Diagnostics menu, I want you to go to the Component Activation category and press the top right key to enter. And during this process, we can test out individual components. When going through each one of these tests, you will select the option you want and then press enter. So the first option that'll come up is the lid lock. I highly recommend testing out that lid lock probably about 5 or 10 times to make sure that it's working properly. Press enter again, press enter again, press enter again, and watch it toggle on and off. The next option is a cold water valve, followed by the hot water valve. Then we have the oxy valve, fabric softener valve, turn on heater operation, recirculation pump, drain pump, toggle shifter, motor slow agitate, motor fast agitate, spin low speed, spin medium speed, spin high speed, unbalanced load detection, detergent pump, and finally softener pump. When you're going through these steps, obviously you want to check each individual component maybe a couple of times. The cold water inlet valve is a great test because I see a lot of times that cold water screen is actually clogged with calcium. Make sure you have good water pressure and make sure that it doesn't stick when it turns off. The agitation in the spin modes, listen for any type of grinding. Make sure that when it's supposed to agitate, it's actually agitating and not the whole drum moving. And then of course, when it's supposed to go through drain, make sure you do not hear any grinding noises through that drain pump and then it's draining with a good flow. Now at the end of this portion, go ahead and hit the top left key to exit and to go back to the Service Diagnostics menu. The next option we have is sensor feedback, so we can go to this category and press enter. The sensor feedback portion is broken into 5 different tests, and they are as follows. We have lid switch, and the display will either show 0 for open or 1 for closed. We have lid lock. The display will either show 1 for unlock or 2 for lock. The water level pressure sensor, the inlet thermistor, and finally, the detergent level. It is important to note that any error codes that happen during this sequence may or may not be displayed on the actual UI once it's complete. What I would recommend doing is after you're done with this, go back into the error code portion and make sure there's no error codes inside the system. If there is, refer to the error code chart that I read before. Now, going back into the Service Diagnostics menu, I want you to move forward until you get to the diagnostic cycle and press enter. This is a great cycle, especially if you are done with diagnostics. It's maybe about 3 to 5 minute cycle where it's going to automatically activate every single component in the machine. You want to feel good once this machine gets done, showing you that it is completed successfully. So make sure you run this, listen for any type of sounds. If you replaced a valve or maybe a shifter, make sure that component is working properly. Once you get to the end of it, go ahead and press back and then move forward into the Service Diagnostic menu until you get to the very end, which is finally Exit Diagnostic mode. Go ahead and press it. Now this is all I have on this machine. Obviously, if you need the service manual, you can obtain it by either going to the manufacturer's website or posting it in the repair help section on ApplianceVideo.com. YouTube, if you enjoy my content, make sure you like and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you next time.